Yeah, well, thank you everybody for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. And I guess as Roger said, this project has been pretty exciting for us. I was involved in the very early competition work that we went through with Holland. This was many years ago to chase the project. We ended up winning the RFP and ultimately developing South Block, which is almost done construction. I'm not sure if you've driven through Broadway, but that's probably months away from completion. North Block is on level 1, so it's under construction right now. And then, as Roger said, middle block, that's a big question mark. We don't really know. We've done a whole bunch of feasibilities on that with Holland to figure out what that could be, but I'm going to show you why it's challenging. So firstly, I guess, just for orientation's sake, if somebody is not familiar with the site, that's downtown San Diego. That white line through the middle, that's Broadway. So the three rectangles there, the white blocks, that's Courthouse Commons. No worries. And I'm gonna zoom in here a little bit further in. We see the 3 blocks there. This graphic was important for us because all the green is open space, right? And it was also something that we wanted to somehow tie into, right, as a meaningful move for these 3 blocks. And this really became part of the original master plan that we did for the 3 blocks. But open space is very important, right? There's not a lot of it, and we wanted to really tie into that network in some way, right? So Roger said, this is the longest skyscraper on its side, right, in San Diego. That's I guess, modernist at its highest, right? 1960s building. Pretty harsh street frontage, right? It's basically non-activated, which is pretty difficult. It actually did have a really nice plaza towards Broadway, but it has served the life, right? And I think that part of it is still there, by the way. So right now we're working. This is South Block over here, almost done. We basically cut the building here, right? So the section from here, from C Street, all the way past B Street is still there, and the North Block, which is on the top there, that's under construction right now. So for the middle block, we don't really know what's going to happen. Some of the ideas that have been thrown out is to first maintain the building and repurpose it, right? So you would maybe strip it down, use the structure, and then use it for something else. The second one is to demo it, and then do different versions of buildings there, right? So it could be office, residential, we've done hotel, we've done a feasibility for City Hall, we've done a whole bunch of feasibilities for it. I guess all that to say that Holland is not yet, hasn't yet decided where to go. It's going to be a market-driven decision. And to explain also a little bit further the complication of those 2 sites in particular, you see that dashed line going through there? That's a fault line. We have like 30,000 of them in downtown. I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot. And they create. I see them actually as an opportunity because it's something that well, you can't build there, so what does that become, right? And so typically fault lines become parks, which is great. And it also becomes an interesting challenge for a building, right? For the North Block, these fault lines create a lot of, let's call them building inefficiencies, meaning parking is difficult, right? You can't build on a fault line. So parking wants to be very rectangular and efficient and all that. And so having these in blocks creates challenges. So that's essentially the way we've sort of been working around those fault lines. For South Block, it really wasn't an issue, right? But for those 2 blocks right there, it has. I think other important things about these three sites, besides the network of streets in the downtown area, we have the C Street corridor, which is the trolley that runs through the two buildings, south and middle. So that's great, right, as a transit-oriented development. We also have Union Street, which is a green street, and basically a green street is a enhanced sidewalk street where it's either bike lanes or enhanced two row tree sidewalks. So it's a really pedestrian-oriented type of street, which is a great thing to have that also ties these three blocks together. A little bit of the uses around the area. You don't see a lot of yellow, so yellow represents residential. In this area, back, I would say probably 10 years ago, really there wasn't any residential around here. I'm very excited that even the A Street corridor towards the bay, there's a lot of new residential projects that are coming in. So having a mix of office, government buildings, hotels and residential really creates that energy that a city wants, right? It really becomes a mixed, 24/7, I guess, city. So having the injection of residential in these blocks is going to be, I think, a great thing for the area, and it will really invigorate the sort of life on the street. And the city doesn't shut down at 5 p.m. right? There's still life after that. So very quickly as a diagram, this was an early diagram we did even for the RFP competition we did for the master plan, but this was when we were just talking about South Block. I'm going to actually go a little bit deeper on South Block and then Middle Block and more high level for the two in the north. But for South Block, and this was where it started, right? What we wanted to do was, first of all, celebrate that we were on Broadway. Broadway is a great boulevard in downtown San Diego, and so we thought that was a meaningful thing. But also tying the three blocks together, and we're showing this sort of green swath to the north in a meaningful way, right? And using Union Street as a means of creating that connection, but also something that could further, be expressed in the way the buildings hit the ground. And so some of the guiding principles that we were taking a look at when we were doing the initial planning was, first of all, this idea of mixed use attitude, right? Residential, office, commercial, all those different things come together are great. Connected ground plane, meaning that you could create public open space in front of a building that is tied to the network of streets, that adds to the life of the street. Active street frontages with commercial uses or office uses, or just lobby uses for residents. The idea of public space, right? Particularly on South Block, which I'll show you. Public space for us was very important. We see that as a great thing for any city, right? And we wanted to really take hold of that and bring it into our project. The idea of visibility and being inviting, and ultimately it becomes an exciting place, right? Because it has all those different things. So the first project I'm going to talk about is South Block to the north, which, as I mentioned, this idea of public plaza. All that in red represents the idea of active frontages, meaning that could be, restaurants or commercial or retail or office or lobby that front that. Front Street on the east side, it's a little bit of a mini highway in downtown. So a lot of people coming out down from the freeway on 5 heading south. You can exit on Front, and it's a heavy street, right? So it's a lot of cars. So it becomes more of a service street in a way. So that's where you have like entry to parking and loading and unloading and all the infrastructure that buildings need. But we really wanted to preserve Union Street that's on the west side as a people street, right? And that really becomes something that ties into how we planned out these three blocks, right? So the idea of this active street and the public paseos. So zooming in a little bit on South Block, you see that, this could have been the development, right? You could just basically build to there and call it a day, right? But what we said was we really wanted to create something meaningful. So what we did was we pushed the black, right, a little bit to the east. So north is towards me. And this really creates, this is public realm now, right? So that's something that the city can now use, city residents, and the building, right? So there's the idea of engagement between the two, and ultimately this idea of connecting, the 3 blocks south to north with this idea of this green swath that connects all of them. The other thing that we wanted to maintain was a sense of connectedness between Union Street and Front, right? So through the middle, there's a connected lobby that you could basically walk from one side to the other, and you could either access the building along Front Street if you get dropped off there, or on Union Street, you can cross the building. The reason we wanted to do that is because of the uses on this building in particular. So this is a true use, mixed use building. It's not just commercial and residential, it has an office component, which is actually pretty rare here in downtown San Diego. There's not a lot of these type of buildings. So having the dual use of office and residential with a single core, I think is actually pretty exciting, right? But we wanted to create something that this through lobby becomes a little bit of a mini airport terminal, right? So there's people from the office and people, going to their apartments. And you actually can see there's 2 sets of cores, right? So there's 4 elevators towards Union Street, and then there's 4 elevators towards Front Street, and then that's the way we sort of split the vertical conveyance between one building and the other. And then this idea of active frontage, right? So as much as we could, we wanted to create that sense of activity around the building. So essentially everything around that red line represents some sort of activity, right? It could be commercial use, it could be lobby use, it could be office use. Holland has been in talks with a lot of potential lease agreements for commercial. I don't have the details because that sort of changes every week, but I think that it looks pretty promising, right? Even from an office standpoint, even though office is hurting right now because it's not a great time for office, they've managed to secure a big tenant for there. So that's exciting for the building development. So that that basically says that everything there engages the street in some way, right? That's what you want in a building. You don't want blank, facades in a building that create detached activity from a building to the street, right? It's not conducive to a great urban experience. And so we wanted to really maximize that as much as we could. And in particular, because of all the different types of streets that we have, all of these are very different, right? Broadway is very ceremonial boulevard, which is a beautiful street. C Street, I think that there have been like 150 type of studies to how to reinvigorate invigorate C Street. It's a tough street, but there's still you have the trolley, which is a great thing for the city. Front Street, as I mentioned, is more of a sort of pass-through vehicular street. And then Union Street, we see that as a more sort of like calmer, quieter pedestrian street. So as far as the massing of the building, in very simple terms, this is office and that's residential. You just stack it together. What was important is that the building actually yielded to this idea of a connected green street, right? So, and that dashed line represents that yielding. And so we saw this as an opportunity to create something that was unique and speak to this relationship to Broadway and its relationship to this master plan move to the north. Things that were important to us when we were doing this was the idea of light and open space, right? Because this is oriented west, means that in the afternoon you get great sunlight, and then you bring the green in, right? So it becomes a landscaped public plaza, which is great. There's other examples of public plazas that don't have trees, and if you're there in the summer, you're cooking, right? So you want to have a sense of shade and opportunity to cool down in a hot day. So that really becomes your open space, right? And the building lifts from the ground. Funny story. At one point, we had actually proposed that this whole part of the building would be cantilevered, but the structural engineer said that that was going to be pretty challenging. It really is conducive to that, where you can, go to a restaurant or, grab a cup of coffee or, go after work to have a drink downstairs. Everything in between, yellow and red is office space, right? These are large office plates too, ranging between 35 to 45,000 square feet. Those are large plates. Typically, an office plate is, I'm going to say probably 20,000, 15,000, 18,000. So these were like pretty large plates. And the reason for that is a lot of the newer tenants are asking for larger office floor plates instead of smaller. I'm not sure right now, but at least back when we were planning this, it was. And then above that is all the apartments, right? So you have that sort of idea of the three uses at play, right? So a little early rendition of the exploration of architecture for the building, sort of putting together all the different pieces from the ground all the way to the top. I mentioned this idea of gateway, and that was important because there was something about being on Broadway that is, to us, a huge responsibility because of the way the street sort of, moves through the city. And so we wanted to really create this idea of gateway condition, right? So this is a little, three-dimensional depiction of the building along Broadway, and you can see that idea of the connected, south to north gesture. And that, really became the genesis of how we saw this idea of gateway. So we basically, lifted that portion of the building, and that became that entry portal into the project. So we're looking at the southwest corner of South Block. This is all fully built now. These are our early concept renderings. It almost looks the same, which is pretty fun. The idea is that this really becomes a people space, right? So it becomes part of the urban fabric, and it's activated. So we see, we created these two V columns. I mentioned that we wanted to cantilever those, but that was a big proposition. But it becomes something that's unique in the city, right? You have office above, activity below. You see the lobby here, so you see this, a tree on the other side on Front Street. So the idea of connected, visually connected to the other street was important as well. And then the life of the street, right? Either as a front door or just being in that space. Really quickly, overall numbers for the project, starting from the ground floor, about 18,000 plus square feet of retail space or commercial space. For the office, that's 8 levels, so it goes from level 1 to level 9, which is the amenity level floor, in between the office and the residential above. About 270,000 square feet of office. And then for the tower, which goes all the way up to level 37, that's 431 units, which Holland has always pushed for affordable in their project. So they have, this is 25% affordable, 25%. So we have 86 affordable units also within this project in 29 levels. Total gross square feet, almost 1 million, that's 815,000 square feet of development. And then, other sort of high level points about the project. I mentioned street experience, so there's food and drink, lobby, and public plaza. There's a lot of shared amenities as well, right? So there's amenities either at the ground floor, amenities at the deck above the office, and then amenities at the top for residents for pool deck and club room and all that. I'll show you some views of the different corners of the building. So southeast corner, you're looking, this is Broadway here, looking to the north. Northeast corner, you're looking at the trolley corridor on C Street, on that corner on Front Street. To the north, I'm standing here on the federal courthouse looking south, right? And then the last view along Broadway. So one of the things that, as we were looking at this, the architecture, I guess the expression of the building was this idea of the relationship between the ground, the base, and the tower. And I think that this image captured that, where it was really we try to instill this idea of open space as much as we could, right? So I explained the idea of open space on the street, which was important. Also, peeling away moments in the office so that you could go outside in a terrace on any given floor, right? And you don't need to like take an elevator and go down. So that was important as well. And then the idea of these shared terraces at the building step was important. Just going through some of the images. This is walking along Broadway, right? So we see this as any potential commercial use spilling out onto Broadway, and taking use of that space. So that could be something very different, right? And you see this, the sense of activity within the inside and the outside. Through the gateway, idea of open space and landscape becoming part of the experience on the street. So that becomes your Union Street gateway into the project. This idea of public plaza, important. These are super fun. So the landscape architects developed these sort of cast concrete planners that are very sort of expressly geometric, which create a very different type of experience on the street. They're currently working on those right now, which is fun. But it really becomes something that becomes a front door, right? Or just a place to be outside. And the great thing about this is that even at night, because of the residential use and the commercial use, it's not just an office building that shuts down. It keeps, the life keeps on going, which is great. So a little aerial view of that open space. So we're sort of hovering above the trolleys here. That's C Street over here, and then Union Street here. But you can see really the building, set back quite a bit to create that idea of open space, which is great. And then, lastly, the C Street corridor, right? I mentioned C Street's a pretty tough street just because of the way it sort of comports in downtown, but we still wanted to create something unique there. And so, again, this idea of creating either terraces. We were also concerned about the scale of the building relative to the city, right? So creating horizontal breaks that would bring the scale of the building down, right? So if you were walking along the street, you wouldn't have this, massive building above, even though it's a large building. But by creating these cuts, that created, a sense of proportion between you walking as a pedestrian and the building above. And you mentioned this idea of shared amenities, right? So this simple little sketch represents that idea of a little park below, and then an office building, and then a house representing apartments, and then a little pool with the palm trees. But that's basically the diagram of the building, right? And each of these green, portions of the building represents a use that could be shared by building residents, right, or building users. So for the, level 9 deck, the idea is that becomes something that gets more used by office tenants, right? So it could have, it has a great roof deck. So that you could have events and spill out opportunities into that deck, and it also has a lot of trees and planters and all that, so it's great. And then for level 37 for the building, a typical sort of amenity for apartment building, we see a lot here downtown, just pool and club rooms and all the grilling areas and all that stuff that happens there. But it's a great way to have that diversity of uses along the building. So good.
On that diagram,
Sure.
Is that 4 levels of underground parking?
Yes. Yeah, I actually forgot to mention that. Good point. So so this actually is 5. Comes down 5 levels of parking. Developers don't like to do that. They want to stay here and build everything above because it's just it's less cost. But because of this use and the huge amount of parking required to park office and residential, you just need that. One thing that was interesting about this building, though, and the way we sort of planned it was a shared parking situation, meaning if you're a building resident, and let's say you go to work, right, you leave at 7 or 8 or whatever time you need to leave, and then an office tenant shows up at the same time, they could theoretically use your stall, right? Use your parking, and then they would leave at 5, and you would come back at 5:30 or whatever, and then you would use your stall again, right? So that, in theory, that's how it works. It's more complex than that, but we use that as a way to plan out the parking. Yeah, and, by the way, I forgot, yeah, please ask questions right now. I don't want to wait until the end. It's probably better if you can engage right now.
On the parking.
Yeah.
Similarly, I was going to ask, will some of that parking be set aside for the restaurants and things that are in the building?
So, okay, so for commercial, the city doesn't require you to park if you're below a certain square footage. And I think I'm gonna say it's at 20,000 square feet that you don't need to provide parking for commercial. If you're above 20,000 square feet, then you have to provide parking. So there isn't any commercial parking per se.
It's so useful. If you're going
It is very useful. I agree. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that it's a weird sort of relationship right now. What's happening between parking and development and the city. Cities actually are at least City of San Diego is very progressive in a sense because they are telling developers that they don't need to actually provide any parking for their developments. So city,
the trolley's right there.
the trolley's there, right? It minimizes any impact that incurred costs for parking's expensive. So city's saying that, but then the market's saying something differently, right? Any sort of commercial developer that's developing an apartment project will most likely provide parking because it's a market-driven decision, right? Somebody's going to rent there. Typically is looking for a place to park their car. We're working actually on another project here downtown, also around this same height of building, 30-some stories, and it actually has little to no parking for the town. It's all apartments, so it's smaller units. But I think the trend, they're actually developers from San Francisco, and the trend is that ultimately developers don't have any parking because you want to reduce the amount of cars, not sort of add to the cars. So we work in that realm where we want to push for no parking. Trust me, planning parking for a building it's a challenge. We have a saying, I'm sure you've heard this or not, but form follows parking, not function parking. And it's very true. We've scratched our heads many times having to first plan out the parking and figure out the parking, and then you sort of figure out the structure of the building, all that. So planning out for parking is a challenge, but it's I guess a necessity right now. It's something that it's a market-driven decision. So this one does have, the beauty about this one though is that it's all below grade, so you don't really see it. But there's other developments that you have the parking above. So a little tour on the different spaces. So this is the roof deck for the office user. The way these were designed is that it becomes more of an organic shape, which is a pretty fun shape. A lot of opportunities for planners. These, by the way, also are great for stormwater captivation, right? So we see a lot of that as a requirement, and it's something that's great for the city because you capture all that water and filter it. The idea of bringing vegetation and landscape and trees up to the roof decks are great, so you can be outside and not be cooking in the sun. The office also has different types of meeting spaces and sort of little conferencing areas that are directly adjacent to the open space, so you have that ability to spill out and be inside. Going up, the pool area. The interior designer also took a look at the expressiveness of the outside space, and so it became this more fun type experience for the pool deck. Some inspiration on the San Diego lifestyle. This is a fun story. We actually brought in. This is a true lifeguard tower that was going to get craned up. and I guess be a little bar area for the pool deck, which is fun. And it really ties into this idea of the landscape lifestyle of San Diego. Lounge areas for building residents, club room. The views from here. I think this is looking west, right? So you're looking at the skyline of the bay. So it's a great way to connect to the city above there. You see a lot of these, a lot of the higher end apartment buildings, the market rate buildings that you see right now. If you take a look at all the tops of the buildings, those are primarily pools and club areas and all those different areas for building residents, which are great. Another view of the club room. Pulling back a little bit to take a look at the building from a material standpoint, you could probably say, well, this is an all glass building, which it primarily is. We were just talking about building materials. A lot of the buildings, I would say, apartment buildings in downtown right now are typically using what it's called a window wall system, right? Which is aluminum glass system, and it's a panelized system, so it's very easy to install, and it's also very effective because you don't need a crane or you don't need like scaffolding. You actually load it from the inside. So for a general contractor building the building, it's a really quick way to skin the building, right? So you just simply just putting all the different window modules within. Typically residential, you see a lot of window wall. For office, not so much. For office, you see more curtain wall, which means that the biggest difference between the two is that a window wall, a little unit for a window wall, basically sits on the slab, on the concrete slab, right? So the load, you're just loading each of them on the slab. For a curtain wall, it's hanging from the slab. So there's an idea of bypassing the slab, right? So it's a sleeker look, less idea of mullion extrusions or mullions on the outside. You can do whatever you want, but at least for this one, it was more of a sort of butt glaze, so glass to glass condition for the office building. And then for the residential building, you see more of the filigree of the mullions above. We still wanted to create, warmth to the building, so we added this sort of wood-like material on the underside of the gateway to create, a warmer expression. And I think once the landscape comes in, that's going to really liven everything up. That's always great for buildings. Metal panel and concrete were also used as part of the expression. And it creates, different moments, right? So this is a conceptual rendering of the base of the building. Originally, we were proposing to do a sort of vertical frit pattern on the glass that would help with heat gain within the building, so it creates, a little bit of shade within. Unfortunately, that went through value engineering and that got checked out. But I think that the expressiveness of the building is still there. The idea of these, open terraces, right? And we proposed doing some sort of garage doors that could really open up and create that inside to outside relationship. Moving up to the tower, I mentioned the window wall system, and that's typically, this is obviously a rendering of it, but that's typically how a window wall looks. It's very horizontal sometimes because of the way you have to capture, so the concrete slab, so this is a concrete building. Concrete slab basically runs horizontally through here, right? So you do a bypass condition with like a metal panel that captures the slab, right? So you can either show the slab or capture the slab. So this building is bypassing, so capturing the slab, so it's basically covered with metal panel, so it creates more of a horizontal band. And then you have the idea of the verticals, right? Window wall typically modulates like a 4-foot module, right, for each of the different verticals. And then you can further break it down with either operable windows or doors or balconies or partitions, right? So those are the different layers. But we're playing, I guess what I'm trying to say is that when we're developing these buildings, we always we're pushed to work within this sort of kit of parts, right? So we have to figure out a way to work with that system because it's something that, again, it's a market-driven decision for developers, and we need to figure out a way to get the most out of it within those parameters. Yes?
How many of the residential units have balconies?
This, I'm gonna say, was about, don't quote me on this, but maybe 70%, 65 to 70%. So city requirement is 50, you need to provide 50% at least for a building, right? And the typical requirements for a balcony is it needs to be 60 square feet, meaning you could do like a 6x10 balcony, or you can sort of play with those numbers. But that's typically where you like to be. And I think a 6-foot balcony is way more appealing than, let's say, like a 4 by 12 or 15 or whatever. This one, we probably pushed it to maybe 65 to 70%. We've also done 100% where a developer says, I have to have a balcony on all the units. We've also done buildings that don't have balconies, and that use a waiver to sort of circumvent that requirement from the city. If, for example, you provide affordable housing on a project, this one has 25% affordable. That means that the city gives you bonuses that you can use for your development. So developers sometimes say, well, I'm gonna do affordable housing, which is a great thing for the area. And then the city says, well, that's great. Then you have all these different things that you can probably use, right? So, for example, if you have affordable housing, but then you don't want to provide balconies, you could use a bonus or a waiver, right, to not have to provide balconies. I don't know if that makes sense. Yes?
Does the city require, or does a builder consider bird deaths?
I actually got asked, I did this.
I just heard an article.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. They don't. So I think it's something, so for us, it's a very important thing. And I think that's something that I think the city needs to be even more progressive. I know that other cities are pushing for that.
Is there some way to, something about the glare on the windows?
So what it is, and I've seen it, they do this sort of, the reflection, basically a bird doesn't register that there's glass there, right? So what I've seen is that you either do some sort of dot matrix sort of patterning on the glass that mitigates that, so a bird notices that there's something in front of them. And or the type of reflection, right? So I'm not extremely knowledgeable on that, to be honest, but it's something that
should be considered.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
On the affordable units, are they basically the same as all the others?
Yes.
Without the balcony, but
Yeah,
otherwise-
so that's part of the requirements that the city says is you need to you can't say all the lower units are affordable and everything above is market rate. You have to distribute equally, within the building.
Whereas non-market, you would certainly, at non-affordable at market, you would certainly charge more for those higher units.
Yes.
So also at the affordable level, they're a little more.
So typically, I would, like any penthouse level, I haven't yet seen that it becomes an affordable unit, just because of the size of the unit, right? But everything below that, you could have an affordable unit that's, let's say, penthouse is 35, you can have an affordable unit on 34.
And is that affordable unit on 34 costs more than an affordable unit on the 10th floor?
That's a good question. I'm probably gonna say maybe yes.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a fraction of increase between floors. It also depends on your view. Views are contingent on your rent as well, right? So if you have a unit, let's say, and I'm probably making this up, okay, but if you have a unit on the east side on level 33, you're gonna pay a number, right? But if you have the same unit on the west side looking at the water, you're gonna pay that number times 10% or something, I don't know. It really depends on that. Developers, from a lease standpoint, they always push for, at least here in San Diego, it's like water view, because that like is great for rent.
These are going on the market in a few months, you say?
Oh yeah. This is probably gonna open up, I'm gonna say, within the next 4 to 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did the developers say about converting condos, building design? That it's not happening, but
Yeah,
long time in mind.
I've heard that a lot, Roger. We meaning Carrier Johnson, don't do condos anymore, because it's like, you do a condo, you're gonna get sued. Because it's a big lawsuit, right, that's coming in, that typically happens. And it's within that sort of 10-year mark, right? So everything when, completion to that 10-year, you're open to any lawsuit on anything that happens on the building, right? And it's almost a guarantee on any condo project. But the conversion to condo can happen at a later time. And so we've worked on projects that are an apartment building that have that sort of embedded to where in a later date it could become a condo project. Yeah.
So these are just apartments for rent then?
These are for rent. Yes, correct. Yes.
I live in the East Village, and it seems like almost everybody has a dog, maybe
Mhm.
two.
Sure.
Do you have anything at all?
Yes, we do. So that happens. Actually, let me go back here a second. Sorry about that. So right here. So you see all this area over here? That's our dog park elevator. So it has a little doggy run and dog wash area and all that fun stuff. Yeah. I love those spaces. I love those spaces, but you also need to be very careful how you plan them, because they can also be pretty noisy and smelly, right, if you don't maintain them adequately. So we always sort of plan them out in a way that, as a resident, right, it's a great way to be outside. You don't need to be going on the street or whatever. But also, keeping in mind that you probably don't want a doggy wash area next to a barbecue grilling area, let's say, right? Yeah. So it does. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Alex,
Sure.
where's the ingress egress to the parking?
So that happens on Front Street, Paul. Let me go back to the plan. Sorry, I'm going back quite a bit. There we go. So you see the two arrows over there? So that along Front Street? Yeah, so you have loading on Front Street on the north side of the lobby. There's a big generator area and all, sort of back of house servicing the lobby. And then the idea is that you could sort of, maybe pick somebody up or drop somebody and then dive into the parking. So that's basically the only in and out. We couldn't, it was actually pretty challenging. That's a great question, by the way. It was pretty challenging because the city doesn't allow any parking on Broadway, right, which is great. It also didn't allow any parking on Union, which is great, on C. So we were pretty fixed on front. The challenge, though, is that it's a lot of people and a lot of office workers, and just only one entry, right? So it becomes a pretty it's just logistically complicated.
Well, and Front Street's a one-way, isn't it?
It is one way, yes. Yeah. So, sort of good or bad. Sometimes for us, not having to provide parking cuts or curb cuts for the sidewalk, those are great things for a city, right? You don't want those. So being challenged to you have to just do it here, right? And it's something that everybody's like, well, that's it. There's no way around it. Let me fast forward here.
So are you gonna have lines going in at 8 o'clock?
Well, there was a big traffic study done, right, to understand traffic patterns, and that's something that typically traffic engineers take care of. And so the idea is that queuing for parking starts not at the street, right, when you're in the ramp. So you have to plan that out. I hope not, right? It's been planned and engineered that way, but something can happen. But the idea is that it doesn't. Yeah.
Are there drop-off spaces on the other side?
Yeah. So there's a big canopy for the lobby on Front Street, Roger. And the idea is that that becomes an opportunity for, pick up or drop off on that area. Union Street, not so much, because it's the sort of like the idea of the street doesn't allow for that as much. But I would suspect somebody, if you order an Uber or whatever, or Lyft, it could happen probably anywhere. That's like how a city sort of functions. Let me go down here. Go in, where was I? All right, let's go to North Block. So I'm gonna, maybe be a little briefer for North Block. I think probably one of the highlights, first of all, again, this idea of tying the 3 blocks to the north, it was important. We're showing this diagram. This is sort of like the ultimate vision for the 3 blocks, right, as a master plan. Currently, though, as I mentioned, the old courthouse building is still there, right? So between C Street and where you see that little plaza in the corner on North Block, that still is the old courthouse building. That actually bridges over B Street. And so what we said was that we would plan out the building to either accommodate that building being there, or ultimately that building going away, right? And then this becomes open space, right, where the fault line is. The idea is that everything in red becomes more sort of active frontage, right? And you may or may not know this, but that's going to be a Whole Foods, so the first Whole Foods in downtown San Diego. And so they basically hold the 3 streets, right? They hold Union Street, A Street, and Front Street as their frontage for Whole Foods. And then the residential lobby, we were actually that also was a given based on how the building was planned out. We basically bent it over backwards for Whole Foods, to be honest. They're very, I guess, interesting to work with. And so we had to plan out the lobby entrance. That was the only option, to be honest, because we couldn't do it on the southwest corner on B Street and Union because of the existing building that's there. We couldn't do it on 8th Street. We always wanted actually the lobby to be along Union Street just because that's a pedestrian street. I always had a hard time having the lobby be on Front Street just because of the way Front Street is, and particularly on that corner. So currently you have the jail building, the city building with the fire station on the corner. You have the existing courthouse building. So all the 3 corners there are pretty non-active corners, right? So it's pretty challenging. But we made it work, right? So lobby lives there on the ground plane, and then everything surrounding that will become Whole Foods. So goes to the building. We're looking at the northeast corner of the building. Again, high-level numbers for North Block. It's actually bigger development than South Block, so this is almost 1 million square feet, of which almost 50,000 is commercial. So we had to provide commercial parking here. So if you go to Whole Foods, you can park here. Parking for this actually happens below and above grade. So you have an entry to parking that you can dip down, and you have a bank of parking below. And then there's another portion that you go up and parking lives, wrapped behind units, right? So what we wanted to do, actually the developer wanted to just provide all straight up parking above grade, right? And it's always, and we've gone through this a whole bunch, right? Designing for above grade parking, it's always a challenge because it's something that you need to skin, you need to cover up, right? Because it's either noise or sound or any of those things. So it's important, but it doesn't equate to having activated frontage, right? So we planned out units to front the parking so that you would have just a parking screen. You still have it on the west and north side, but what we wanted to do there is create something that was a little more artful, that created more filigree and the idea of maybe murals or art that can inhabit that. This has changed. These were early concept drawings, but as you can imagine, Whole Foods being here, they're going to do their own sort of frontages and all that for that building. Very similar also to South Block in a sense because this also has a big roof deck, right? So the plate for where Whole Foods is and the parking is large. It's basically the whole city block without the fault line. And then the tower sort of lives a life on that southeast corner. The lobby's over here. So, you know, a little zoom in into the corner, mentioned the idea of, you know, creating murals and art as an expressive way to invigorate and, you know, create that sense of, you know, artfulness to the parking. This is Front Street, right? So also creating a distinct corner move there. And then, you know, basically Whole Foods really inhabiting the whole base of the project. This is the northwest corner, right? So this, we're looking at Union Street going down. So this would be essentially, I think, one of the entries into Whole Foods. There's going to be one on the northeast side, and then one on the northwest side as well.
And Whole Foods is going to be such an asset to people living in those.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, somebody clap. Yeah, no, I don't think that there's a grocer in sort of like the northern portion of downtown. You have Ralph's, then you have, you know, stuff over here without them. But yes, Whole Foods is going to be great for that area, for sure. Yeah.
Bring your credit card.
Yeah. And then lastly, you know, talk a little bit about middle block. I mentioned that we don't really yet know what's going to happen there. I mean, it's going to be really contingent either the agreement that Holland, the developer, has with the county to figure out a way and a path forward. Right now, I foresee that the linear skyscraper that Roger mentioned, that's there right now, is probably going to stay there for a while until we figure out a way to develop it, or they figure out a way to develop it and we'll help them. We've done many versions of what could happen here. This was one, right? This was saying that it could become an office tower. You could fit an office tower there. Parking is a challenge, but you can do it. You could also do a hotel, which hotels require less parking, which is great because you need to provide the parking. Residential as well, and anything in between, right? I think we've done many different studies of what this could be, and Holland has run all their performance to figure out a way to develop this, but at this time, there isn't really a clear, you know, sort of future for what would happen for there. One of the things I was telling Roger though, is because of the fault line, you have an inherent natural open space because you can't build there, right? So that is an opportunity to create something also that is enjoyed by the city, and the building can sort of interact with. So I guess all that to say is that we're hopeful that this, you know, turns into something great, but at the moment it's a big question mark. But I still wanted to show this because it was really the whole idea, and, you know, sort of bringing it back to the beginning. It was really about a master plan approach to the 3 blocks so that they would work together, and not just together isolated, but together with the entire downtown area. So I think with that, I'm going to conclude, and if there's any additional questions, or yeah, please.
I have a few.
Sure, yeah.
Are you tapping into the C Street cogen lines for cooling your tower?
That is a very, I don't know. That's a very technical question,
What
yeah.
kind of replacing these things to stand?
Well, okay, so that I could try to answer. The way I've heard this from a seismic standpoint is that structural engineers plan for, they call this a 100-year event, so that any building is designed to withstand like the big one or whatever, right? And so that means that you're pushing, you know, above 9.0, right? 10.0, 11.0. So they're the rigidity, or I would say the way they design the structure or the seismic systems for these buildings are planned for that. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
So 10.0, you're still okay.
Yes.
Then the last question I had here is, were you given any developer bonuses for the open space above the fault lines?
Yes.
So you can't build there, but you were given developer bonuses because you can't build there.
Well, so I say yes, definitely for South Block, right? Because this doesn't have any fault lines, and we still provided the open space, so that becomes a bonus incentive, right, for any developer, which is great. I think they also consider fault lines of that. The other thing that the city does is that because if you have a fault line, you can basically use a term that's called, like, you have a challenged site. And that challenged site criteria opens up possibilities for other such bonuses. Yeah. Yes.
Do you qualify for LEED, anything?
Yes. So Title 24 in California is actually pretty restrictive, which is great. So by just going through the Title 24 process for the state of California, you're at least at a LEED Silver, right? So yes, all these buildings are within that at least. Yeah.
What's the forecast for the south block and the middle block?
The what, sorry?
The development, what's the forecast for the south block and the middle block? Roughly,
Forecast meaning?
when they can start to build?
Oh, well, this one's almost done, right? So
North block?
North block, I would say is probably mid 25. Yeah, ish. Yeah.
To start or
No, so North block has already started. They've actually come out from the ground, so they're pouring, I think, the slab on level 2 or 3 right now. And so it's well on its way.
And the lease with Whole Foods is already signed, that's a done deal.
That is a done deal. But we worked on Radiant. Is it? And that had a signed agreement with Target. They had, I mean, if you drive through there, walk through there right now, they have red, they had signs, they had purchased like everything.
Wow.
And they ultimately decided not to be there. But here's a funny story. They actually still hold the lease, and they're going to hold the lease for 10 to 15 years. And they were paying rent. But it was I guess it was a financial decision from Target. Yeah, and
Right now the space is empty.
it's
Target
just a
has
shell.
the
It's just a shell.
option to go into the next couple of
And
years.
they could, right? They could if
Or sublease it?
It's
or
like the
sublease, but they hold the lease, and so they determine who does it.
It's like the Whole Foods in San Francisco,
Uh-huh.
where I lived, and I don't know if you're familiar with that big Trinity apartment building.
Oh, yeah.
The Whole Foods downstairs.
Sure.
And then my best friend worked at Whole Foods and lived upstairs, and of course, that shut down, big damage to the city, but Whole Foods is still paying rent there, as
Yep.
far as I know.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps in future years.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, so hopefully that's not the case here. Yeah.
You mentioned the project you're working on that without parking. I assume it's at the ballpark storage.
Yes, that's the
tower.
one. Yes, correct.
Is that going to get built?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're in construction documents right now. Close to. I mean, I'm going to say we're maybe halfway there in construction documents. And it's fully funded to keep moving forward, and it's going to get built. Yeah.
Would you take that down? It's a very
No, oh, we're not. No, we're gonna maintain it. So similarly to how we maintain the Farkas building for Reagan, right? So the whole base of the building is a historic building. The ballpark storage building is also Kleinfelder, Weinfelder, I can't remember the name of the actual building. But that's also deemed historic, and so we're gonna maintain. Yeah, well, it has certain details. Yeah, I guess it's subjective, but it's also objective in a way because there's a threshold on the years or when it was built, if it has any particular sort of architectural detailing and all that, you could, I guess it's available, but we are maintaining it. It's a pretty big challenge structurally to maintain these when you're in construction, because you have to do a whole bunch of structural gymnastics to do a building and still have those existing walls. So it becomes a challenge, but that's the plan. And that's gonna actually get repurposed into units as well with the building.
Because that building is already solid.
So we could squeeze in some parking, but it's pretty low density for the amount of cars that it has to the amount of units that it has. So most likely, there's not going to be a lot of offering for parking for the building. Yeah.
On the parking, I'm surprised that the developers don't go in together to have a parking for everybody where nobody.
Yeah.
They ever discuss that, they want to cooperate or?
I've heard that, Roger. I've heard, for example, using existing parking garages in downtown as a means to park, right? Ultimately, they basically opt for a competitive market offering, meaning if BOSA is developing the next apartment building that's providing, there's always this sort of comparative development strategy, right? So if BOSA is developing any one of the projects that they're developing and then they're offering, let's say, a ratio of 1.3, for a unit, then any developer that's looking at those comps is gonna do an aggregate of that and sort of be within that range if they want to be competitive. But I've been in conversations where a developer is looking at alternate strategies and having maybe a bank of parking in a garage that's unused, right? Well, maybe we can repurpose that or reuse that and then not have to provide a lot of parking on this development. Yeah.
But isn't a parking structure is a money-making operation if it's not just included with the building?
It is. You're right. If it were a standalone parking, it's really a money-making operation. If it's a parking embedded in a development, you're charging the rentee or the rent, some additional money for that parking stall. But yeah, typically yes. That's sort of like the way it's.
And you can design them to look pretty good.
I've seen pretty handsome parking structures, right? I've seen not so much as well, right? So
you require some kind of artistic something.
yes, and the city also pushes for that, and I'm a huge proponent to not have these just open. You see a lot of those in like downtown LA. And actually there's examples of these here in downtown San Diego. So I think that's almost time, right, everybody? Any last questions?
Thank you very much. One more question
Yeah.
right there.
I came a few minutes late, but did you talk about the tunnel?
Oh, the tunnel, talk about the
Did you talk about
tunnel.
You know what? I forgot about the tunnel because nobody sees it. Last question. We'll wrap up. So it's a great question. There's a tunnel. So the jail building and then the courthouse building, they used to basically either use a car or van or walk somebody to court and back on the street. And so as part of the agreement Holland did with the county was that they had to provide a tunnel that would burrow down deep below the earth and connect the jail building with the courthouse building without having, a person have to go to court, be on the street on a car. So I have a photo of that. So that's the tunnel. It was extremely challenging. I wasn't personally involved in this, and I haven't been down there because it's pretty, the security on this project is important, right? But it was a massive engineering feat.
Which blocks does it run under?
So let me go back to the drawing here. So essentially, it goes from this building, which is on the east side of Front Street, right? And it travels below the middle block towards the courthouse, and it connects there. What was extremely challenging was that when the courthouse building got built, they were the ones first there, but the alignment on the sort of like the receiving end of the tunnel was in misalignment to where the tunnel had to. So it was a huge, imagine, yeah. It
They
was
figured that out when they built the channel?
Yeah. Oh, they got there. It's like it's not there now. But it was a big challenge. But it's there and it's operating and it's a big success for that.
So you're saying they're building or have built that pedestrian tunnel under the old courthouse building? That's
Yes.
going to be eventually possibly torn down or
Yes.
replaced with.
So any development that's there needs to account for that tunnel.
So how many levels of subterranean parking could a new high-rise have before it smacks the
Good.
tunnel?
So great question. I think that this is down at about the 80-foot mark. Yeah, so it's way below the earth and way underwater. Yeah. Because water table is like at 7 feet here in downtown San Diego. So you hit 7, you're hitting water.
So
Yeah.
it is a channel.
Yeah.
Go to the fall. Thank you.
Yeah, it is public.
I think
Yeah.
what he said was, it was like an $80 million project, like 4 times what their earlier.
It's very costly. Seismically, it was lots of structural gymnastics.
Oh, yeah, he said, talk about if there's an earthquake.
So there's a damper. I mean, the tunnel basically works. It's 2 sections with a damper, seismic damper in the middle, right? So if a seismic event happens, that it needs to work independently of the 2 pieces and of the buildings as well, right?
Because it crosses the fault.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.